Let me start by thanking Rajiv and the entire organizing team of this conference for inviting me. I'm also the culprit who managed to disrupt the meticulous planning by turning up late, so I apologize for that. And people who know me are invariably very sort of apprehensive about my presentations because they tend to be very long and dreary. And so I will try and curb my enthusiasm about my PowerPoint skills and focus on some of the the facets of what I interpret as the sort of as the conference's theme. And let me just talk about something that Rajiv touched upon briefly. I think when we talk about the new economy, we tend to invariably, talk more about the idea of technological disruption, change in technology, in business practices, continuous innovation, which I think has thrown a lot of companies completely out of gear. And I work for a large bank, and the kind of challenges that we face from this constant change in technology and offerings that competitors provide, we have to catch up with, or we want to be market leaders, is indeed very disruptive. But there is, I think, the other facet of the new economy, if I'm interpreting it right, is the entire business of what is going on in global politics and the economic implications of this, major shift in the kind of political and institutional structure that we had sort of taken for granted. And it all started in June last year, and with Brexit, and none of us had anticipated it. And I think almost all opinion polls, this is, of course, tells you how much to trust opinion polls, had said that Brexit will not happen. And Brexit, I think, it happened in the UK. How does it matter to us? But Brexit set the stage for a change in, I think, the global political platform and platforms that began to gain momentum from something that challenged the very idea of the advantages of globalization, right? And so you had a couple of things happening. You had the European right-wing parties, gaining momentum, and there has been, Europe, as most of you would know, has been in the doldrums. And one of the manifestations of that, one of the results of that, has been the fact that a lot of countries have seen the rise of right-wing parties who want to break away from again this collaborative club, which is their own sort of mini globalization. They want to break away from the euro as the common currency. They want their national currencies back. And with Brexit, I think this got a leg up. And I think the final sort of nail in the coffin of this implicit assumption that we all made until just a few months back, that globalization would be a good thing. This new institutional, the old institutional order with its various structures like the WTO, the prospect of greater migration of labor, free trade of goods, and so on, that began to be challenged. And sort of the ultimate challenge has come from Mr. Trump, right? And so when you're talking about managing in a new economy, this is a reality that you have to live with. That what you could assume just about a year and a half back about the way the world behaved the way, the consensus on how the world should, where the world should move, what it should move to in terms of, freer movement of different things, capital, labor, goods and services, of course, that has been fundamentally challenged. And I think it's not something which is, just, something you read about and in the papers or in journals or on the net. I think as future managers, and I'm addressing the students out here, as future managers, this is possibly a reality you will have to learn with, to live with for a while to come. Because I think there is enormous political momentum and considerable, perhaps not majority, but considerable vocal support for this move towards a certain kind of isolationism. Right? The problem is that it's not good for the world. If you protect and you get into this business of trade wars, and one country imposes tariffs, the other country imposes tariffs in retaliation, right? It doesn't work well for the world. And the IMF has given some indications of where the world is headed if you had this kind of trade war. And it says that if there is a potential trade and tariff war, and prices increase by 10% over the next 3 years, global growth would plummet by about 2 percentage points, investment would come down, and of course trade would tumble. So you are looking at the twin problems of a rising strident protectionism of people like Mr. Trump, and possibly more and more leaders who come to the limelight in Europe, right, who will champion the cause of being isolated, right? So you will not be able to sell goods and services from your companies as freely. I mean, one clear and obvious manifestation is this H-1B visa business. But you will also perhaps get jobs in an economy, in a global economy, which is not only trading less, right, but also slowing down. And I think that's a challenge you will have to face and contend with over the next few years. I hope sort of it, good sense prevails, and things there is a reversal of this trend. But as of now, I think this is the dominant, political trend or structure that is going to sort of at least rule over a lot of Western politics. I think this raises questions about Indian companies. Ironically enough, China, which has been always sort of touted as a currency manipulator, as sort of anti-globalization in the sense that it sort of it uses the global market, but it's very closed itself in terms of allowing in certain things. It has strict controls over its labor and capital markets and so on. Now, China has now emerged as the poster boy of globalization, right? And increasingly, as the US, as a part of its America First, which is its sort of inward-looking protectionist policies, begins to lose interest in the Asian region. Mr. Trump has scuttled the Trans-Pacific Partnership, which was a way towards, aligning the U.S. more closely with the Asian region. He scuttled that. And I think fundamentally in his scheme of things, his relationship with Asia will be far less engaged and more transactional than previous US administrations. And in this world, China is emerging as a major force in two ways, right? It is offering some of the support that potentially US could have provided on various fronts, foreign direct investment and so on. So it wants to be the anchor in Asia. And China has also sort of moved away from being a strictly export-driven economy with loads and loads of investment, which perhaps isn't profitable, to a more consumer-oriented economy. And this is a transition that they have made over a period of time. So I think one of the challenges of the new economy and the questions that Indian entrepreneurs, Indian business has to answer is that how should we, and of course at the political level, how should we view China going forward? Do we rework our sort of global relationships, our international partnerships? Do we now move away a little from the US and look towards China as the principal business partner, if you like? A lot of other Asian countries have started doing that. Malaysia, Thailand, which are part of the Trans-Pacific Partnership, have actually started making very, very strong overtures towards China. So again, you will be managing in a world where the US as the principal anchor or the principal support externally for your economy will diminish, and you will have to make certain choices. And you would also actively have to look for markets within the Asian region, and the big unexploited market within the Asian region is still China. And I think that's something you have to sort of figure out, and I think our politicians also have to figure out how they're going to play the China game going forward. The other, we all talk about disruption, and I think the big disruption is, of course, coming from increasing levels of automation. And the World Bank, just to sort of give you some numbers, has predicted that the proportion of jobs threatened in India by automation, and I can see this happening in our bank. Most of back office operations are being threatened by the prospect of increasing automation. In China, it's about 69% in India. In China, which has automated to a very large degree, it's 77%. In a country in Africa like Ethiopia, it's 85%. So it's not automation. Earlier, I used to associate at least automation with the Western world, where there is a problem of a demographic decline. People are getting older, so you get machines in, robots in to do the work. But that's no longer true. It's a challenge that countries like India, China, which are hugely labor surplus, are facing. So what do we do about this? And one of the associated questions or policy debates that has emerged, and again which affects you directly, is what path of trying to create employment, what employment path should we follow? And let me just fill you in on what the conventional wisdom was. And the conventional wisdom was that we moved to services too quickly. We didn't pay enough attention to manufacturing. So we kind of, to use the words, sort of paraphrase the words of a famous economist who wrote extensively on this, and Kreuger, we missed the middle. So since we missed the middle, we should actively look for it. But with all this automation and so on, I think the question that needs to be asked, and perhaps Dr. Rajiv Kumar would want to comment on this, the question is that whether is manufacturing really the way forward, right? Should you be looking for, do you want to be people who should be looking for jobs in the manufacturing sector? Or is manufacturing, because of this heavy automation, no longer going to be the engine of growth as far as employment is concerned? Yeah? I think that's something that you need to ponder over. And the alternative, and this is something that Mr. Jaipuria talked about in his initial comments, is platform-based services. So people are saying that, look, the way forward is perhaps at the lower end in services like construction and some other categories, And the big driver going forward, and this is something that the consultants have been peddling in a very active way, is platform-based services like Uber, like a lot of the other services which do not really own too many assets. So what is really the way forward? And that's a question that I think you need answers to, and you need to ponder over when you're planning your careers, when you are engaging in research on the consequences on the new economy. I think these are very live issues for countries like India, where despite a labor surplus, we are stuck with the prospect of increasing movement and acceptance of machines as a way of doing things. And finally, I think jobs are a function of growth. And will growth come back? But growth I think the impact of demonetization is waning, and remonetization is taking place, and growth is coming back. But I think there are fundamental issues that are not being addressed, and you will possibly sort of go on to the job market in a situation where banks continue to have a massive amount of bad debt on their books, right? There was a hope that the budget would, address this in some way. The concept of a bad bank would just, basically take some of these bad loans off the books of banks and restructures them. That didn't sort of pan out in the budget. I think the government is making, I think in terms of the prospects for growth, and to the extent that we depend on the government for it, and I think, again, Rajiv has been very vocal on this point, is that I think we are, barking up the wrong tree. I think we are stuck with, policy making, which believes in a certain kind of dogma and fundamentalism that is perhaps not warranted in this stage of our growth. And today, you will realize that the private sector, when you sort of seek jobs, and one of the constraints that you will find is the private sector is not setting up too much capacity, right? They're virtually setting up no capacity because there's gross underutilization of capacity, right? So it's up to the government to play a bigger role, and for it to play a bigger role, it needs money, right? You can't play a bigger role in pushing growth forward and pushing investments forward without having enough money, and the budget provides that money. So unfortunately, we are, I think, being victim to a certain kind of very, very narrow ideology espoused by agencies like the IMF and so on, that we should be, stable, and we should be as prudent all the time as possible. And the word prudence is interpreted by them in a very, very narrow way. And the idea is you can be prudent by not spending on your, day-to-day kharcha, right? But if you want money for assets, right, and if you are the only asset creator in the economy, right, I think you should be given money for it. I think it's simple logic. But somehow, we have been held hostage by people who have influence in both the government and the new agency that Rajiv will be associated with from today. So it is a difficult situation, and in this kind of situation, I see some growth coming back, but without the government actually playing a more active role, I think prospects remain somewhat dim in terms of a full-blown recovery, free job offers on the first day that you go for your recruitments, I think those days might be some distance away. And on that terribly ominous note, I will stop and thank you very much for having me and listening to me.